Hey friends, Andrew Carruthers here, Education Director for Sam Via, jumping on live with you today to share some tips and tricks on the technique of point cutting. We're seeing lots of texture and movement in hair right now, so this is a technique that we feel you should have great ownership over as a hairdresser. And so we're going to go through some concepts of different ways to use point cutting, but also how you control the technique, because there's a lot of things that are happening that we see when we're out working on the road and helping out at your salons that we think we could help you out. So if you're here with me, say hi. I'd love to see who's here with me. And if you have any questions on the technique of point cutting, please let me know. I'm happy to address things with you guys. Hi, Eduardo and Zahara, Dana. Tahinder, hi, boss. Oh, hey, boss used to be my nickname, actually. Heather's watching while her client processes. Perfect. Way to spend some time while your client's processing, getting some information. All right, I'm going to jump right in. And like I said, if you have any questions, just leave them over here in the comments, and I'll get to them. Jamie, I'm not Sam. I'm Andrew, actually. I'm his education director. But compliment taken, so thank you. All right, so point cutting is any time that we're cutting from the outside in. So the shear is going into the hair from the outside in. Now, one thing I think that's important to designate is, why would we use a outside in technique like point cutting versus an inside out technique like slicing? And the reason we would choose point cutting over slicing is where it's going to affect the texture and the length first. If we approach hair from the outside in, we are primarily going to affect the ends first, and that's where we're going to see most of the effect of what we're doing. If we turn the shear this way and go from the inside out, then we're going to affect the interior of the hair first and then move out to the ends. So both are really effective. It just is really a decision on, where do you want to affect the hair most? Is it more on the ends, or is it more on the interior? So we're going to focus on point cutting today, and then maybe, actually, if you guys are on our YouTube channel, Jesse Linares, we've had a bunch of posts with him recently that we've put up that have a ton of information on inside out cutting. We just barely posted something fresh for you guys, so check that out too. Hi guys. Hi Norma and Yanette, Margaret. All right, so point cutting. There's a couple of things that really make the big difference. First is going to be the angle that you approach the hair. I'm going to move her a little closer so you get a nice view of it. So the angle that we approach the hair, whether it's very parallel to the grain of the hair, or if we start to come in more at a diagonal to the hair, that's going to make a big difference on the visual texture. If we are very, very parallel to the hair, what do you guys think? Is that going to give me a really defined texture, or is it going to be really soft? Leave it in the comments. What do you think? Let's see what you guys think. Silver, you're saying you're never taught to point cut at school. A lot of schools don't actually teach point cutting, which, there's goods and bads about it. Mainly, usually in school, you're going to learn to blunt cut, really just because there's a lot more discipline in that shape, and you kind of can get away with less. Point cutting is nice because you can get away with a little bit more. Good. So we have lots of mixed information. Good. So soft is actually the answer, because if you think about what's going to give me defined texture, if I'm very parallel with the hair, I'm going to create very tiny little holes. And those tiny little holes are going to give me a very soft effect. Now, if we go at more of a diagonal to the hair and we approach like that, then you can see how defined we start to make that texture. So the more diagonal to the hair you are, the more defined the texture you're going to have. The more parallel to the hair, the more soft it's going to be. So first thing you have to decide is, what's the visual texture you're looking for? And that's going to help you to decide what angle you're going to approach the hair at. The one thing that you need to be cautious of is if you go too far this way and you start to make cuts like this. Sometimes we see people point cutting, but they're almost kind of just jabbing across the hair. And you can see what that's doing is almost just kind of leaving me blunt, chunky ends. And this is where we get into trouble, where it's not really texture anymore. It falls into chunky pieces that usually you end up having to texturize back out of the hair. So you want to be a little careful with the angle as well. So Bailey, you're asking, when do we use each technique? We're going to talk about that a little bit further. Let me talk about one other piece to the puzzle, and then we'll talk more specifically about when do you use different techniques as far as inside of your haircuts. Sound cool? And I did see your question about curly hair, and we'll talk about curly hair as well. Hi, Dan. I will tell Sam. All right, so the other aspect is how far you actually go into the strand. If we are very, very shallow, you can immediately imagine where the texture is going to be focused. It's just going to be very much on the tips of the hair. The deeper into the hair strand we go, and depending on that angle, that's going to affect the interior of the shape more. And you do have to think about that, because sometimes you might want the texture just on the ends. Maybe you don't actually want to disrupt the density or the texture on the interior of the hair. You're just looking to soften the ends. So let's see. Bailey, you were asking, when do you use each technique? So here's a good example. Actually, let me put her over here for a second. Let's bring another model on. So if I want to just affect the ends, that's when we're going to be more shallow and probably a little bit more parallel with the hair. We want to be cautious with how diagonal we get if we're being very bold. So this would be a great opportunity is when you're cutting fringe, and let's say you actually want your line to appear somewhat solid, but you want a soft edge to it. That's when this very kind of shallow point cut would be very beneficial. And you can see I'm staying somewhat parallel to the hair. It's a little bit of a diagonal. But if I go too far diagonal, that's when, especially at these lower elevations, it's going to start to look choppy and chunky. So especially when you're working at low elevation, like cutting a fringe like this, be cautious of that angle. And if in doubt, I would say be more parallel to the hair, just so that you keep things soft, okay? So what you can see there within that section, and I'm kind of standing off to the side so you guys can see, which I'm not going to get a real straight line out of it, but but what's cool is what you can see is you can actually create a pretty strong line there, but it's going to have that nice soft edge to it. So especially if someone comes in and they want more of a blunt fringe, but you don't want to give it too hard of an edge, especially if they have a thicker texture of hair, a shallow point cut like that might be best for it. Now, on the other side, if we're looking to cut layers into hair, a lot of times what we see is we see people using a very shallow technique or a very soft technique like that, thinking that they're going to achieve texture. This is kind of a waste of time. So once we elevate hair, even if we cut it blunt, as it returns back down to its natural fall, when it gets to here, it has traveled so far from where you first blunt cut it that it's going to soften itself anyway. So even blunt cutting is going to appear more soft once we get to higher elevations. But what we see a lot of times is people will elevate the hair and then they'll do this. And I say people do this, I used to do this actually. So I would do like 100 little itty bitty point cuts, and you saw how long it took me to actually get through that section. That's kind of a waste of time when we're at high elevation. It's not a waste of time at low elevation because you're going to get that softness in the line. But remember what I said, even if you blunt cut this, by the time it drops to here, it's going to have some softness to it anyway. So a really subtle soft point cut like that, it's just not going to be super beneficial at high elevations. And one of the things we try and focus on with our education is efficiency in haircutting, so that you're not wasting time behind the chair with how you're approaching the technique, so you can get the best results as quick as possible. Let me just check these. I've got a lot of comments popping up. Let me just check through here real quick. Okay, we're doing good. Gang Castillo says, shout out everyone. And I apologize if I say your names wrong. It's hard to know exactly how things are pronounced. So I realize I just didn't tell you the solution. So instead of very softly point cutting like this with tiny little chops just in the ends, what we have to be willing to do when we're layering hair and we want to see more visual texture is we need to be more aggressive with the process. So we would recommend that you get more diagonal to the hair and reach deeper into the hair strand as you're cutting, because those kinds of peaks and valleys, yeah, they might seem pretty strong right now, but again, remember, as they fall down into gravity, away from where you cut it, those are going to soften up a lot. And if you're looking for that really visually separated texture that we see a ton on like Instagram and social media right now, if you want that super separated texture, you have to be willing to be that bold. And it's hard almost sometimes to break the habit of wanting to really be micro and control the line. But think about how much texturizing you do after the fact to try and get that separation. So put it in as soon as you get it. So Joe, who you're saying new to the channel. Cool. Well, welcome. We've got tons of education for you, so hopefully it'll help you out, my friend. Silvermont, you're asking what size should be a point cutting shear? Okay, this is a great question because it really depends. Let me grab a few shears here and we'll compare. Okay, so this is our 6-inch Signature Series swivel shear. So not a huge long blade, but it would be enough for if you're just looking to do some shallow point cutting, or if you're just trying to get further into a little bit further into the hair. The Signature Series, the nice thing is we do have that swivel option if you like to do more of a swivel shear. Which the big benefit of that is ergonomics as far as keeping your wrist in a really nice position. This shear is our 6 3/4-inch Streamline Series shear. So you can see, definitely have a little bit more length to that blade. So this is definitely going to be preferable for if you're doing something like I just showed you, where you're trying to get really deep into the hair strand. And then if you want, you can even jump up to the big daddies. This is our 7-inch dry cutting shear. Look at this thing. It's like a ninja sword, right? But it's only a tiny bit longer than this shear, but it does have that wider blade, which gives it some structure. So when you're cutting on thicker, heavier dry hair, it doesn't fold hair. And by the way, we are in the middle of a sale this month. It's a big sale on the Signature and the Streamline Series shears. They're $125 off on the website if you guys are looking for shears. This is a great month to look at shears. It's one of our best prices of the year. And we do have payment plans available. So with $125 off and a payment plan, you can actually get some killer shears for really, really good monthly pricing. So hope that helps. Justin, you're saying you love the dry cutting shear. You use it every day. Yeah, it's one of my daily drivers too, man. Oh no, Silver, you just dropped your shears. Oh, it's the worst. It's the worst sound too when it first hits the floor. All right, so we've got Offspring Freak, maybe? I think that's maybe it. You're asking, what does this do in comparison to a texture shear? Love that question too. So let's look at that. So here's our Signature Series reversible blending shear. So you can see lots of teeth, tons of teeth, but very small teeth and not a ton of space in between. So when you're looking at texture shears, that's kind of what you're looking for, is you're looking at how large are the teeth and what's the spacing in between. So this is our signature series Invisalign shear, sorry. And you can see that the tooth spacing is much farther apart than this one. So this one's going to give you a much softer feel, less teeth to cut, so you're going to leave more hair. So that's how you kind of balance when you look at texture shears. So the main thing that's going to happen when you're using a blending shear or a texture shear is as you cut, it's going to put lots of tiny little holes in there. So a texture shear is almost always going to give you more soft results unless you are really specific about your technique. There's ways to get more dramatic. We do what we call a weave and blend technique, where you just take the solid blade of the shear and weave it through in big pieces, and then you can kind of camp out. The nice thing with how dense that tooth spacing is, you can see I took quite a bit of hair away pretty quick, and then you can be more deliberate with a blending shear. But typically, if you're just working like this, it's going to be very, very soft. So it's going to give you more of a similar effect to if you're point cutting with a very parallel point cut. And then you can use this very deep into the hair or very shallow. We're glad you're here too, Silver. Let's see. Curvy Girl, you're here brand new too? Cool. Welcome to the channel, my friend. Hi from Brazil and from India. Very cool. We've got international group here. Karina, you're asking if the texture shears are on sale as well? Yes, they are. So both the reversible blending shear and the Invisablend are on sale. I'd recommend the reversible blender if you're looking for something that's super versatile. I use these for shear over comb on men's haircuts or really short women's haircuts all the time, because you can see that tooth spacing is so tight together, you can actually remove quite a bit of hair at a time, but you can also use them as a softening shear. The Invisablend is really good for if you're looking for a shear that you can be kind of aggressive, especially something like up here in a fringe where you're trying to remove weight. I wouldn't do this with this shear because it would take too much away, but with the Invisablend, you can close and just take very, very soft amounts of hair with each cut. We call it the Invisablend because this is actually not a sharp surface, it's a polished surface, so only the teeth cut. So it allows the hair to push forward as you're cutting, so it keeps things super, super soft. But yes, those are a part of the sale too. Got hair all over my computer now. Joe's saying, yes, painful, probably about dropping the shears. Kevin, you're saying you're in barber school and want to master these techniques. I'll tell you, man, here's one thing that will set you apart as a barber, especially, is really understanding texture. It's one of the things that we see doesn't get taught a lot in barber curriculums. And especially, you know, we're seeing guys return to more of this kind of stuff with haircutting. You know, there's still a huge trend in the super bald fades and the really structured lines and, you know, the greased back kind of looks, but we're seeing a lot of movement, and I would be curious if you're seeing this too. We're seeing a lot of movement towards texture, and I actually just got my haircut today, and I actually specifically asked him, this guy Dylan that cuts my hair at Cielo Salon in Medford, Oregon, you know, I specifically asked him to keep this a little bit longer through the sides because, you know, I used to get pretty tight through the sides, but I'm liking a softer texture now. So yeah, definitely master those texturizing techniques, Kevin. That'll really set you apart, my friend. And also you were asking about left-handed shears. Yes, we have left-handed shears in every single shear we make, except for the 2 Artist Series shears, which are kind of our premium line shears. But everything in the Streamline, everything in the Signature line, everything in the Essential line comes in a left hand. So yes. Sorry, just checking comments. I'm not just like looking off into space here. Hema or Hema, I'm not sure how you pronounce. Good, you need lefties too. We've got them for you, my friend. If you guys are outside of the United States, you can contact our customer service too. We do ship outside of the United States. So just looking to see if oh yeah, curly hair. Almost forgot about the curly hair. James, you're asking if I'm wearing studs or plugs? Plugs. Beverly, you're asking, would you use point cutting mainly to blend? It kind of like what we've been talking about. You can use it for anything. You can use it to blend, you can use it to soften, you can use it to remove length. It just all depends on how deep or how shallow you cut and then the angle of the shear. So let's talk about the curly hair, because this is a really important thing to understand, especially if you're going to be cutting layers or something into curly hair. A lot of times we think, oh yeah, I want some texture in that curly hair. So we'll come in, grab our section, and then just kind of wail on it. Well, look at how wispy that leaves those ends. On curly hair, that equals frizz. So one of the things that we teach, as far as with curly hair, which is actually really common with fine hair, believe it or not, is one of the things that we teach is the ends need friends. So what does that mean? It means if I want a textured finish on curly hair, I need to be more creating this. Because now the ends have friends. So that can actually create a curl without having just a super frizzy finish to it. If it's too separated and there's lots of little wispy pieces, that can't form an actual curl. The ends can't grab together to form a great curl. So that's where we get that frizziness from. That's why a lot of people say, don't use blending shears on curly hair. And we've got a huge thunderstorm coming in, so hopefully I'll make it through the rest of this without our power going out or something, or our internet. But that's why people say not to use blending shears on curly hair, because typically what we see when people are using blending shears is they're doing this kind of stuff, which that is definitely not good for curly hair. But what can be good for curly hair is that technique I showed you guys before, which is to notch with the blending shear. So you can see I've weaved out a couple pieces, and then if you just kind of camp out pretty close in there, you can actually form some pretty strong pieces. That is really great for taking some bulk and density out of curly hair. So it's not necessarily that blending shears can't be used on curly hair. You just have to be cautious with how you use them. Bless me. All right, let's see. Tahinder or Tajinder, I'm not sure how you say your name, but yes, same principle applies for kind of thick hair that tends to be fluffy or frizzy. Now, if you have thick hair that tends to lay really nicely, like Asian textures of hair, you can put lots of tiny little holes into that. It just depends on if it's frizzy or not. So if the hair isn't frizzy, you can be really pretty deliberate with creating little holes. I had some Japanese clients, and they actually taught me that a lot of times in Japan, they pre-texture the hair to remove weight first. So they'll literally approach the hair right down at the scalp. Can you guys see that? Let me turn her a little bit more. They'll literally come in right down at the scalp and just close with a blending shear to remove density first. And they'll pre-texture, pre-take out all that weight and density before they even start the haircut, because they know they're gonna have to remove so much density to get that loose, lived-in feel. And those ladies, you know, I would do my typical process, which was to cut the shape first, and then I'd start to take weight out of their hair, and they'd just be like, nope, more, take more, take more, take more, take more. So it would have been way more efficient for me to just go through and take a bunch of bulk out and then actually cut the ends, and it would have been more efficient. So hope that helps too. Joe Hu, I'm glad you're liking this, my friend. Oh, no problem. Kayla, you're asking, can you show some good point cutting to soften a bit, please? Yes, absolutely. So let's do this real quick. Let's give her a problem. Let's give her, you know, a lot of times what happens is we think we're layering, but we're holding the hair at kind of lower elevation. So we do something like that, and then it goes to fall. And what does it give us? It gives us that. gives us more of a heavy line because we're actually cutting more low graduation into the hair, and that's going to create weight. So we see something like that in our haircut, we go, oh man, look at that line, that's really heavy. Now, first thing is we want to address the hair that needs the texture. So what you can even do if you see something like that, just take your comb and just touch it and see how that just picked that piece right up and it just put it right back into my hand. So that's a way that you can make sure that you're only addressing the hair that needs addressed, because all this stuff didn't need anything. So what we've been talking about is that approach-wise, we want to stay very parallel with the hair at this point, because we're just looking to soften the edge. We're not looking to necessarily create really deep interior texture or deep visual texture. So we want to stay very parallel. If we only just barely kind of skim through these ends, it's not going to do a whole lot for me. When it falls back down, I'm still going to have that weight and density. So what we want to do is get a little deeper into the hair strand, and we're using that 6 3/4 inch streamline series shear, so we can get a little further in, and then we're going to be able to work deep enough into the hair strand so that as we work that through, we can actually soften that line. We need to create those little peaks and valleys in there. So then when that falls back down, it's not going to have so much strength to it to form such a hard line. Hope that helps you out. Oh, Lisa, that's really cool. I mean, it's not really cool that you're in bed with 2 broken legs, but that makes me happy that you have something to watch today, and that we're bringing you some joy, my friend. That's really awesome. We got Indonesia, Argentina, UK. Oh my gosh, this is so awesome. I love doing these things because we get to meet so many of you guys. Yes, Kayla, more parallel. If you were looking for more visual texture, you can change the angle a little bit. And we'll post this live video to our channel so that you guys can go back and review some of the stuff from earlier too. Rude Rocky, you're saying you don't get the difference. Okay, let me explain. I'll give you one more little kind of understanding. So if, let me get you a nice blunt piece so we can describe this again. If you stay very parallel to the hair, what it's going to do is it's going to create very tiny little holes in between the hair. So that's going to create softness. If we want to create actual visual texture, more separation where we can see pieces of hair, that's when we have to bring the shear in more diagonal and create more deliberate peaks and valleys. Because this is actually going to create that air space and separation that when the hair falls, it's going to separate itself and give movement to it. A lot of times what we see people doing is they're trying to get that more piecey texture, but they're doing very soft, light point cutting and creating lots of tiny little holes. Or they're using a blending shear, how they would traditionally use a blending shear, and they're just kind of doing this. How many of you guys do that? I know that I used to. And you think, oh, I'm texturizing the hair. No, you're just thinning the hair. You're softening the hair. You're removing weight and density, and you're softening the shape because you're putting lots of little holes in between. So hopefully that makes sense. You have to be more deliberate, and that happens by taking a stronger angle. Thanks for answering that, Joe. You're welcome, Cecilia. All right, I'm going to give you guys another chance to throw 1 or 2 last questions in there if you want. And if not, I'm going to start to wrap up and just kind of give you a quick recap. So the 2 things we talked about that are really important is the angle of the shear in relationship to the hair and the depth that you enter into the hair. So if we're very parallel with the hair, it's going to be soft. If we go more diagonal to the hair, that's going to give us more dramatic texture. The deeper we go into the hair, of course, the more we're going to affect weight and density further into the hair. And the more shallow we are, the more we're just going to focus on the ends. So that's really kind of the big thing. And one last thing, to practice point cutting, because I know a lot of you might be a little afraid of this, just grab your shears and go home. The big thing that people cut themselves is because they're closing as they enter into the hair. What you want to do is actually close as you exit from the hair. So when you first enter into the hair, you're just establishing how far into the hair you want to go, and then you close on the way out. So what my the guy that apprenticed me, my journeyist or journeyman, taught me is come in, tap, and then release, release. So that way, if you're only closing on the way out, you're not going to cut yourself. And it's all about muscle memory. So grab your shears, take them home with you, sit on the couch, watch a movie. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting your name, but you have 2 broken legs. So this would be a really good opportunity to practice your shear techniques. So if you have some time, just sit and practice that. And that's going to help you a lot with your point cutting. So let me just check these last few comments. Julie, you're asking the difference between long and short layers. It's exactly what it sounds like. Short layers, we're cutting them short. Long layers are going to exist probably more in the ends because of the length of layers. You have to be a little careful just because those kinds of terminology are not universal within hairdressing. So when a client sits in your chair, or as a consumer, if any of you are watching right now that are just going in to get your haircut and you're going to try and describe the haircut, the words that we use can sometimes create a lot of confusion, because what short layers are to me might be kind of different than the next person. So talk more about the results that you want. Where do you want the layers to sit? Do you want them short through the top and leave the ends really full? And pictures are always really helpful with that too. Andrew, I don't know that I could really give you a recommendation on how to do these things yourself, because I mainly teach professional hairdressers where we get to stand out here with 2 arms. There's probably honestly better YouTubers and stuff out there doing stuff on themselves that can help you with that, my friend. Margaret, you're asking about the dry cutting versus the regular shears. So really, dry cutting, the reason we name them that is because dry hair tends to be more difficult to cut because it's more structurally sound. Wet hair is easier to cut through. So the design of the dry cutting shear, it's probably hard to see on the video, but there's this little ridge here and a wider blade. So what that does is even if you're cutting a lot of big, thick, heavy hair, it just kind of plows through the hair. Now, with the 6 3/4 inch, this is the streamline shear, and you can see it has a much thinner blade to it. If I try to do that same thing, it's going to kind of push the hair more before it cuts. So the 7-inch dry cutting shear is really about capturing the hair really well and cutting through large amounts of hair really effortlessly. So we recommend that shear for people that are doing a lot of condensed cutting, cutting on really thick, heavy hair, or a lot of dry hair. Hope that helps. Yeah, dairy blogs. You're saying please tell them not to do it on themselves. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Of course, our recommendation is always go to a professional hairdresser. I know that there's lots of you guys out there that, we get stories all the time like, hey, I live nowhere, I can't find a hairdresser, things like that. And so people are out there looking for ways to do a better haircut on themselves, and hey, that's okay. But we would definitely highly recommend that you leave this to the professionals. Cool. All right, I am going to say goodbye, my friends. Oh, we got someone from Morocco. Your question's a big one, my friend. I don't know that I'd really be able to answer that, because that's 2 completely different haircuts. Pulling it forward or pulling it backwards is going to give you completely different results. So it's more about desired end result than it is about a preference with that kind of thing. So that would be a big question. All right, guys, so I'm going to say goodbye. Like I said, this will be up on our YouTube channel, so if you want to go back and review anything that we talked about in the beginning, please do. And if you do need shears, don't forget we are running a sale this month in September, $125 off the Streamline and the Signature Series shears, the ones that I've shown you here today. And we do have payment plans on the website now too, so if you're looking for good quality, affordable shears, now's the time. And if you need anything from us, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks again for watching. I'm Andrew Carruthers, Education Director for Sam Villa. See you guys. Thanks for hanging.